Thank you, Fabrizio, for the kind introduction. And my talk is on the social and economic impact of presbyopia. Now, globally, we know the biggest cause of blindness in the world is cataract. And we also know that the biggest cause of low vision is uncorrected refractive error. And this has been shown in many studies over many years. When we talk about uncorrected refractive error, we're not just talking about uncorrected myopia, but also uncorrected presbyopia. And in some ways, we can almost think of cataract as one of the end stages of that presbyopic eye, that aging eye. If we think of the definition, first of all, of presbyopia from the Boorish textbook, presbyopia is this slow, normal aging of the eye, and it results in a irreversible reduction in the amplitudes of accommodation. This will lead to sufficient blurring that will lead the patient to ocular symptoms, usually of unable to read, and also asthenopia, so some headaches and pains around the eye when they're using their normal near working distance. And I know Sotiris Planis is in the room, and he's out from Greece, from Volos in Greece, living in Crete now. And he will want me to tell you that presbyopia is a Greek word, and presby is aging, and op is eye. And so we're talking about an eye which is getting older. And we talk about presbyopes, and I think in Italian you say presbiti, I think, for somebody who's presbyopic, which really means they're like an old man. So I often like to think of presbyopia as not just an aging eye, but eyes like an old man. And it means that we're getting older, and our eyes are feeling that function now of getting older. So I want to start with some data. That this is a study I did with one of my PhD students, and we looked at why do people visit an optometrist. And we did this in two sites, one in Australia in Adelaide and one in the UK. And we asked them the reason for their visit. And you can see the dark blue colours are the UK patients, and the light blue colours are the Australian patients. But let's just look at the dark blue colours, the UK ones. So you can see that a lot of the patients will present for near work. You can see that in the mouse isn't working, sorry. The middle of the chart, the near patients, these patients are having near visual difficulties. But if we add in some of the others, so these are patients who are presenting because they're complaining of a near symptom. But there are others, patients who say, I'm coming in to get new spectacles. A lot of those will have presbyopic spectacles, bifocals, varifocals. A lot of them will complain of headaches. You can see that's a big group as well. And in the UK, we have a lot of patients who present every 2 years for a routine, or every year for a routine eye examination. And a lot of those will be presbyopic as well. So there will be presbyopic patients in the other groups too. And probably 50 or 60% at least, and maybe even higher, of our patients will have some symptoms of presbyopia. Now, as I joked about before, if we didn't have anything to read, we wouldn't be presbyopic. So let me just go back in history and tell you a little bit about the history of optics, or if you like. Now, the first real book, the first real treatise on optics was written by Alhazen, at the bottom you can see his name, in 1025. And he lived in the part of northern Syria, southern Iraq, that area. And his book was later translated into Latin by Roger Bacon. And this book was talking about how to use convex lenses for magnifying. But we do have history of lenses before this as well. There was something called the Nimrod lens, which was a 3 centimeter diameter lens found in an archaeological site, again in that area around Iraq, Assyria. And Aristophanes in Greece also referred to burning parchment leather with a lens and using sunlight. Socrates also in Greece, he talked about using sunlight, and this sunlight could damage the retina, and he talked about this especially for patients who were looking at an eclipse, that they could get permanent damage to their eyes. So the properties of light and lenses were starting to be known. And Pliny the Elder, he also talked about using lenses and sunlight to cauterize wounds, to produce enough heat to seal a wound in the skin. So there was some interest in lenses and optics already. And we don't know really why the Nimrod lens was invented. No one's ever documented why it was invented. But it could have been part of an old telescope. We don't know really. We do know that in Florence there was a manuscript, and this was the first time anyone wrote about spectacles. And Sandro di Proposa, he wrote in this manuscript, "I'm so debilitated by age that without the glasses known as spectacles, I would no longer be able to read or write. These have recently been invented for the benefit of poor old people whose sight has become weak." And again, the words are there, the old people whose sight is weak. So these are the presbyopic people. And spectacles, he said, were invented for these people. And there was another famous writing in a text, again in the same sort of area in Tuscany and Pisa, where somebody wrote, Father Giordano wrote that it's not 20 years since the invention of spectacles, and I myself have conversed with the man who made them first. He didn't actually name the person who made them, but maybe this person made his spectacles, I don't know. But so we put a timeline on the invention of spectacles at around this sort of 1280 to 1300. This sort of time period is when we say spectacles were invented. And we often say they were invented in Tuscany or possibly even in Venice. But we're not 100% sure about this. One of the people who we think may have invented them is Salvino Amati from Pisa as well, same sort of region. But there is a text where it's written in the text, the ancient chronicle of the ministry of St. Catherine in Pisa, where it actually says he didn't invent them. It says that somebody else invented them, but didn't distribute them to people. And so Father Damonte, he started making them for everybody's use. So maybe he was the person who made mass production of spectacles, we don't know. And Alessandro Spino in Florence as well, he, on his gravestone, his family wrote, "Here lies Alessandro Spino, who invented spectacles." But we now believe that that was a fraud by his family, and his tombstone was actually removed and put inside, out of display in that cemetery. So we don't really know who invented them, that's the point. There is a theory that they were invented in China, and Marco Polo, when he went to visit China and came back to Italy, he brought back this invention of spectacles. We have that theory. But the Chinese themselves claim that they were using an Arab invention from the 11th century. So it might fit in quite nicely with Alhazen's work and that sort of time period when spectacles were invented. We had some contributions in the UK. And we had the sidearms put onto the spectacles in London, and then eventually the hinges to fold the spectacles away. And we know a little bit more about bifocal spectacles. There was ideas in Germany, in Switzerland, and Benjamin Franklin was often credited with inventing them. So we often talk about Franklin's bifocals. And he wrote a letter to his friend in London when he was working in Paris. And he wrote a letter to his friend, and his friend wrote back to him and said, "I've talked to Peter Dolland about your invention." And in UK optics, Peter Dolland's quite an important figure. His father was John Dolland, who invented the achromatic doublet, and Peter Dolland was the person who started a big company in the UK called Dolland and Acheson, which recently was merged with another company, but this is one of the oldest historic opticians chains in the UK. So we think that these bifocals were made by Dolland at that time for Benjamin Franklin. But let's think again through history. I said if we didn't live for such a long time, we wouldn't have this problem. And historically, people didn't have this problem. If you look at life expectancy in the US, in the 1800s, life expectancy was in the low 40s. So a lot of people didn't reach a presbyopic age group. As we've moved through time, people are living longer, and now we say that if you look at these age groups here, in the year 2000 and, where are we? 2000 and, 300? Oh, we have one, thank you. We will live till about over 100 years old. Nowadays, we live till about 78, and 150 years ago, we were living till about 43. So you can see how our life expectancy is increasing, and our symptoms of presbyopia are also becoming more of a problem for us. Also, if we go before 1800, really there was nothing for us to read. so the reading wasn't an issue for us. And the printing press was invented in the 15th century in Germany. Maybe there was an earlier version in China 200 or 300 years before that. But mass production of printing material was not available for people to read. We got our news through other methods. Now, of course, everybody has a mobile phone, everybody has a computer or a tablet, everybody reads a newspaper. So reading at near distances is becoming commonplace. It's expected. It's something we expect to do. I just thought I wanted to just talk I think this is quite an interesting thing. It's not so scientific, but life expectancy through antiquity, through ancient times. And these are the ages at death of the kings of England, from William the Conqueror, who died at the age of 60, to George V, who died at the age of 71. And he's our current Queen's father. And then if we go back in history and look at the Old Testament and the prophets in the Testament, we'll see that people lived a lot longer, and we can see that Noah lived till he was 950. And I always wonder, okay, was he presbyopic then? So did he become presbyopic at 45 and he had 900 years of presbyopia? Did he have some myopia, maybe some meiosis? It's hard to say, isn't it? We don't know really how he was able to read. Maybe it wasn't so important for him to read, but if we look at someone like Abraham, who lived till he was 175, well, Abraham wrote the Abrahamic scrolls, so he actually did write something down as well. So for him, reading and writing must have been more important. I think it's quite an interesting thing. And I'm quite interested in sort of world history and religions, and one thing we don't know is who actually wrote the books of the Old Testament, who actually physically wrote them. I know we have names to the Gospels, but who actually physically sat down and wrote them? And we don't know that with any of the religious scriptures, but for Muslims, Prophet Muhammad was the prophet, and he had a scribe because he became a prophet at the age of 40, so almost presbyopic. And so from the age of 40 till he died at 63, he was asking people, telling people the revelations, and which became the holy book for Muslims. And he had a scribe, so he had a young man who used to write down the things that he would tell him. And this is what people had. In history, they had scribes. And again, historically, if you wanted to destroy or conquer a nation, you destroyed their books. So when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, they destroyed the libraries and the synagogues and the books. They say that they stole the tablets of Moses and broke the ark. When the Vikings attacked British Isles, they attacked the monasteries and they destroyed the religious books as well. The same when the Mongols went to Baghdad, they sacked the libraries, and even in Europe, in the European Inquisitions, in Spain, in Roman Inquisitions, etc., Muslim and Jewish libraries were destroyed because this was a way of destroying a civilization. And I like this picture as well. So this is in Sikh history. Sikh religion is not as old as many of the other religions, and it's sort of 500 years old. And this is one of the sort of gurus or prophets of Sikhism. And what I like about this picture is going back to that phrase of what is presbyopia, eyes like an old man. Well, we don't like to think of ourselves as getting older. We don't like to think of ourselves as being less virile and less important. And here, the guru, the prophet, is shown as the young man, and his scribe, who's writing everything down, is shown as the old man in the painting, because we want to show that our leaders are very powerful and they don't need to have reading glasses, and so they have these scribes, but the scribe is actually older, so probably he was a lot older than this. This is the last picture about the history side of things. I saw this picture many years ago, and I thought, because we don't like to admit ourselves being older, this is a picture of Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan was in this photograph, as you can see him reading a document. And when I saw this, I thought, it must be a fake picture. He must have just done this for the cameras to show everybody. He's wearing his cowboy hat, he's very strong, and he's just reading some notes. And then I did a little bit of background research to this. Ronald Reagan was actually highly myopic, and he used to take his glasses off when he was acting. And later on, he was fitted with contact lenses, and he was fitted by this lady, Dr. Estelle Heron, in Los Angeles, and he used to wear the Toohey PMMA lenses. And one interesting thing about Ronald Reagan is that he used to claim that he invented monovision, because he used to often take one contact lens out. So when he came to a podium to do a speech and his notes were in front of him, before he walked out, he used to take one contact lens out so he could see his notes. And he told Dr. Heron that he said, I've cured my presbyopia because I've invented this way of using one eye for seeing distance and one eye for seeing near, and I'm going to call it monovision. And he said this and she wrote this in a quite interesting article. You can see the article, it's actually quite interesting web link as well, or just do a search for Ronald Reagan monovision. In some parts of the world, people don't live to the age of presbyopia. And I do some work in some developing countries where we're trying to improve primary eye care. And I've met with health ministers of countries where we've sat down and I've said to them that we need to have optometry in your country. And they look at me as though I'm speaking in a strange language and say, no, we need to cure the hygiene problems and the child morbidity problems and life expectancy problems. And those are higher priorities, and certainly they would be higher priorities than me talking about presbyopia, because in those countries, some places in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, the average age is still in the low 40s, high 30s. People don't live to become presbyopic. They don't live that long. And of course, in some parts of the world, I know it's, for example, in the Australian native population, the Aboriginal population, people become presbyopic earlier. And maybe this is some genetic element to this, or there's some nutritional element to this as well. So we do have what we call objective presbyopia. This is what happens to all of us. When we reach the age of 45, we can no longer focus for distance and then focus for near. So we tell everybody that your lens is getting harder, it can no longer flex and move the way we want it to. But try to explain that to a -3 presbyope who says, well, I'm not presbyopic because I just take my glasses off. So the -3 or -2 presbyope, they don't even realize that they're presbyopic. So we have what we call functional presbyopia. And this doesn't include those low myopes who can otherwise see for near when they remove their correction. So these functional presbyopes are more prevalent in the developed nations, in Europe, America, etc. And they are less prevalent in the Asian countries where there's more myopia. So we estimate that by the year 2050, we'll have 1.78 functional presbyopes. This isn't just people who are presbyopic. These are people who are suffering with symptoms because of their presbyopia. And some work by Brian Holden's group in Australia has shown that the presbyopia correction is not the same for everybody. And this book, Presbyopia, two of the authors of this book are here, Satiris Planis and Professor Neil Charman. But in this book, one of the figures that's shown is that presbyopic correction is substandard, really, if you in many parts of Africa, many parts of South America, most of Asia, and really what we'd consider to be the developed or European, America, Australia, developed world, presbyopic correction is more available. And in all presbyopes, presbyopia has been shown with a negative impact on quality of life. If you become presbyopic, then your quality of life suffers. So when we do a quality of life score for these patients, we ask them how they get on in their daily life, and not just a visual quality of life, just natural quality of life. They will always pick out that they can't see for close. It affects them in their daily life. Let's look at the social economic burden of presbyopia. Well, if we just look at presbyopes, well, we think that there's globally about $11 billion is lost in revenue and productivity because of presbyopes. Now, if we fast forward and say, well, okay, if everyone lives to the age, everyone works to the age of 65, and therefore the loss of productivity up to the age of 65 can be up to $25 billion. So there's a big loss of sort of income for those people and for that nation and for that and for us globally, I suppose. So what's the take-home message to this? Well, the important thing to remember, I think, is that presbyopia reduces the quality of life. We are all going to become presbyopic. Some of us will manage it because we have low myopia. Some of us will manage it with other methods. And it does cause visual symptoms. It does cause asthenopia and headaches and eye pains, etc. as well. And uncorrected, it can have a reduction in productivity, which can have a knock-on effect and cause an economic burden. Presbyopia certainly reduces a person's confidence, but these days there are lots of treatment options. And my final point is my take-home message, and I think this is especially for the younger practitioners. Good communication is the key. You don't know what it's like to be presbyopic. And I remember my own lecturers telling me this. And Fabrizio joked about this, that he's been coming to this conference for 20 years. And now that we're all approximately the same age, Giorgio, myself and Fabrizio, we're all in this presbyopia stage now. And I think maybe in 20 years' time, Giorgio will have a conference on low vision aids, I'm not sure, or macular degeneration. But now we're at this stage. And presbyopia is a pain, it's a problem, and I'm at that stage where I'm trying to deny my presbyopia and I'm trying to hold things further away and use a good light and do this. But, you will get caught out. And I was in London 2 weeks ago and I was trying to read the map, the tube map, the underground map, and I couldn't see it at night. So I had to find a light in the street and sort of hold the paper. And then eventually I took my phone out and magnified it and I could see where I was trying to go. So learning to speak to presbyopes is important. Learning to know what they need, learning to know what they need to function well, and how to improve their quality of life. And I think this is our role as opticians, optometrists in primary eye care to get the best out of our patients with that good communication. Thank you very much.